Hello, I'm John Jolliff and I'm happy to be here with my long-term partner, now my husband, Des.
And I'm Des Smith, and I'm also happy to be here with John, and we've been together 32 years, and we met first on the steps of Parliament. He actually bought me for $5.
And I've not been able to get rid of him. There was no discount whatsoever. What was happening, it was the day that the awful petition against homosexual law reform was presented to Parliament, which people have subsequently described as a sort of Nuremberg rally. It was a real sort of theatre, partly organised by Americans who were trying to stop the law going through. Des was standing on the steps of Parliament, collecting money at the day the awful petition was put through, or the awful petition was presented to Parliament, and what he wanted and what I wanted, along with many others, was for the age of consent in the homosexual law reform bill to be exactly the same as heterosexuals. People were saying that, oh yeah, well, I'll vote for it if the age is 21 or 18, but the heterosexual age of consent was 16, and there was no logical reason whatsoever for any difference. So I gave Des $5 towards the contribution, my contribution towards the advertisement, and bingo, we're still together.
Yeah, it was 16 or nothing. That was what the ad was saying, and we were quite emphatic that we didn't want homosexual law reform if it was not equal to heterosexuals, which is equality, and it is justice. So I was here in Parliament at that time, 1986, 85, 86, when the bill was first put into Parliament in 85, and then July the 9th it was passed in 1986. So I got involved in the campaign early on, and I was just talking to Winton before about getting onto talkback. As time was going and this bill was coming through and the antis were getting really fired up, I became more and more articulate on human sexuality. Amazing who turned up. You don't know who your friends are until something like this happens. But people gave me books like the Height Report, the Wolfenden Report, and I read and I understood, I more understood about me and got on to talkback. So Paul Holmes was the talkback host, but apparently every time I got on to talk to him, there was a barrage of antis would come on after me. So the producer said, we will phone you at about 20 to 12, because they finished at 12 with the talkback, and you say what you want to say, and that won't give time for the antis to say very much at all. Paul Holmes was really, really very good at helping get this bill through. But what happened is, in Auckland, they started a group up called HUG, H-U-G, Heterosexuals Unafraid of Gays. Now, I was working actually for a woman doing a building job, and she knew how I was very supportive of homosexual law reform, and she was too, in her own way. She was a woman with a couple of kids, but she was very supportive. And when they announced on television that HUG started in Auckland, and I arrived at work and she said, we've got to start one here. Ring up Paul Holmes. So I got hold of the producer and said, I want to talk about HUG. Okay, she said, we'll bring you back 20 to 12 and you talk about HUG. So Paul Holmes suggested that I give my phone number, crazy thing to do, but I did, and we'll get people who are interested in joining. So next thing is that this whole organisation in Wellington revolved around me. Now, Wellington is interesting, far more political probably than other parts of New Zealand. We've got a university, we have the Parliament here. Within days, there were well over 100 members. So you imagine this, I just gave up work because the whole thing was revolving around me. Eventually, I got a woman called Kim Saffron, who is a marvellous, very, very articulate, intelligent woman, and she took over as the spokesperson for HUG, and I acted as liaison officer, because then I joined up with Gay Task Force. I acted as the liaison officer with Gay Task Force and HUG. And from that, we evolved quite a big organisation with quite a bit of money we were given, and with loads and loads of posters which we plastered the town with, and we even went out of our area where there was wavering MPs and helped with them as well. And interesting is Shirley Smith, who was well known, the lawyer, wife of Dr. Such, well-known person. Every time she saw me, she said, "Oh, I haven't given you any money." She'd open up a bag and give me $50. I mean, this is the sort of people you met, wonderful people. On the other hand, there was the antis, and that was quite traumatic. And like I had a rock put through the windscreen of my vehicle, we had rocks chucked at our house, and this sort of thing could have got you down, but fortunately, the people who were so supportive and such wonderful people you met, that sort of counteracted that bigotry and hurtfulness coming from the antis.
What you haven't mentioned is that not just were you very much involved with these things, but you helped create a fair for a fair law. This was the first gay lesbian fair in Newtown School Hall. There was a certain amount of resistance by some members of the staff about having a gay lesbian organisation hire the hall, but that was ameliorated by a wonderful member of the community, and the first gay fair was set up, and there were 10 stalls in the hall. Des and 2 others were prime movers, and it's the beginning of what is now out in the park. It's one of the longest running gay lesbian organisations in the country, which meets every March, I think, these days. But you were working without any income coming in. It was a very, very hectic time. But you were not alone, fortunately. There were a lot of people, and there were people in Parliament who were doing great things. Fran Wild was absolutely astonishing. And to me, it's quite remarkable to be in this rainbow room, because at that time, I was working in the public service, just across the road. There was no earthly way I could have announced to anybody that I was gay. I could have been classed as a criminal. Certainly in the public service, I would have faced discrimination, because I know 1 or 2 people who were denied promotion because of their obvious sexuality. And you know, I sit here somehow in a sense of awe, looking around at what has been achieved over the years, not just by people in Parliament, but by very, very dedicated members of the community and their supporters. We have worked together, Des and I, on a number of issues, including the Civil Union Bill. We set up the Civil Union Bill Support Society when a Member of Parliament took advertisements in the Listener claiming that this is a bill that nobody wants, it's just pink think by Labour. And we looked at each other and thought, hang on a minute, we want it. We want the ability to have a legal relationship, a relationship that may not be challenged in law, that would protect us when we were perhaps in hospital or visiting somebody in hospital, because there were times when, unless you were a, quote, significant other in law, you could be denied access to someone who was dying. And now we have same-sex marriage, and that is wonderful. I hope that this room is a lesson to all parliamentarians, because the history is here, the ethos is here, and diversity needs to be recognised. And it's not always happening, even now, since law reform and civil union bills. We have had unfortunate examples of parliamentary behaviour in my mind. We've had a senior member of Parliament who was displaying an Air New Zealand uniform, and he minced down the runway in what he saw as a stereotype of a gay model. At the Select Committee hearing on same-sex marriage, Des and I were making submissions, and one member of the committee was, I'm going to say, ignorant enough, and had the audacity to say, well, if the bill goes through, who will be the husband and who will be the wife? I was frankly gobsmacked. Des fortunately had the wit to say, well, we don't actually role play, but John does most of the cooking. And that helped a lot. It's been an amazing roller coaster ride, because we came and made submissions here initially on the Civil Union Bill, and we were there on the first day, and a newspaper reporter wanted a couple, and wanted to talk to a couple. And before we knew it, we were on the front page of what's now the Dominion Post, and that led to us appearing in radio, television, newspaper articles, even in Canada and China, believe it or not. And we became the poster boys. And you know, we were known, we'd walk along the street and somebody would come out of a restaurant who we didn't know and shake a hand and say, good on you guys. A very different atmosphere to way back in law reform, which Des was talking about.
Very much so, but it did amuse us. John did mention about appearing in a Chinese paper, Canadian paper, but also what we found online was a poster, all in French, against homophobia, as the French say, homophobie. And they were a photo of us embracing each other, and this is a poster they used in France against homophobia. Well, I mean, that to us was very amusing. Hold on. They didn't ask us, but you know, so what? One of the things we did learn during homosexual law reform, and this is what Fran Wilde repeatedly said, the visibility is so important. If somebody knows you've got gay neighbours, if someone knows, it's like the little kid over the road knows we've got a rainbow on our car, and her mother was saying that they went to cross the rainbow crossing, and she said, oh look, this is something for John and Des, you know. I mean, this is, the visibility is very important, and that does break down barriers, especially with the troubles in the world now. The two major things are COVID-19 and climate change. Now, when you get something like that, people look for scapegoats. Already, some of these nutty groups in America are saying, oh, it's because we allow gay marriage, blah, 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 blah. This is what you look at history, and if you look carefully at history, you see the Jewish persecution and the persecution of people of same-sex relationships. There's an absolute parallel of being used as a scapegoat.
I think this raises
so we want to be very aware that we want to be careful and just see what evolves and battle against anything which is going to
this is the other V that Fran mentioned. It was not just visibility, it was vigilant. Because there are people who would happily turn back the clock. You know, we've seen those comments. We've seen those comments, particularly in the United States at the moment. And I think it's important, as Des says, to be visible. After all, what are we? We're just an ordinary suburban couple. I think that's possibly why we ended up as poster boys. We were not particularly threatening to anybody. So it wasn't a question of predator control. It was a question of, okay, just the guys like, in the neighbourhood.
I have to mention Bill Logan here, doing homosexual law reform. Bill Logan was absolutely a brick. I mean, he was amazing just how much effort and time he put into the campaign. But he had the appearance, as someone said at that time, I don't know about now, but the appearance of that time of just being one of the JCs of the community. And this is the organisation of people who wear a suit, or sort of like, it's a forerunner to the Lions Club and other sort of, I don't know if JC's goes anymore now. I think it's sort of abandoned, and the Lions still goes, doesn't it?
And Rotary, yeah.
Rotary.
But we've been very lucky, I think, in New Zealand that we don't have to go back very far. We're looking at 1985, 86, and where we could have been classed as criminals. And here we are, we're a married couple, and it's just a matter of fact thing, and I think that's wonderful, but there is still work to be done. There's work particularly for the trans community, and I think the whole issue of gender and binary issues seems to be sort of resolved, but we've come a very, very long way. There is still discrimination, there's still misunderstanding out there, but I hope it's a great deal easier for younger people today. What is always difficult for anybody who is gay, the first thing that is difficult is to recognise yourself, to recognise that you are in fact different, what the difference really is. And is it important? How does society see it? What we've done here in New Zealand is to build a society, a legal framework for a society anyway, that says it's okay, be who you are. And that to me is an absolute joy, and I'm thrilled.
Yeah. But I like the line from Strictly Ballroom, the film. A life lived in fear is a life half lived. And we still know people who live in fear of not telling their family. These are people of similar ages to ourselves. And that is so sad. And this is why when a person just know who you are, accept who you are, and get on with living, don't live in fear. And this is what young people these days, fortunately, majority of them can live an open life and they don't have to have that fear. I'm sure there are some, because as we know, there are groups and societies, organisations, religion, which do still suppress people's sexuality. So we had our civil union, and we got our civil union certificate, CU number 1. And we had it, and Kerry Prendergast, whom we did know, she helped with the saying we could have a town hall, we had to pay just for the security guards. The Brass Razoo band said they would lead a parade from the town hall in Wellington, where we had it, over City Sea Bridge to the boat shed where we had our reception. We had 200 people at reception. It was a hoot. There was loads and loads of gay flags, the Brass Razoo band. We had a waiata done by the Kapahaka group on the other side of the lagoon. And I don't know how many hundred other people turned out for the occasion. But it was a real occasion and something really to celebrate.
We were very fortunate that Kerry Prendergast, who we'd approached during the campaign to make some supportive statement, volunteered to be our celebrant. We didn't even at that stage know she was a celebrant. So we thought, right, this is wonderful. We were just so lucky. It was one of the fortunate things that happened.
And we had steps up to the, the chambers and the town hall, all lined up with either side of rainbow flags. And then we had a great big rainbow flag about nearly the size of this room, held by a whole lot of guys, and the Brass Razoo band organised. Don Franks, if you've heard of him, but he was the one that had the Brass Razoo band, said for nothing he would lead the parade. So it was quite a parade. There were some Australians apparently. What is all this about? They were staggered. And as we went over the City to Sea Bridge, the amount of cars that started honking, it was quite an occasion. But 10 years exactly, what we did, we decided we would have our wedding. And so we had this wedding held at Zealandia, and we used the 3 floors of Zealandia. Downstairs we had the ceremony. And then on the 2nd floor we had a Kapahaka group, Te Whanawha. And then on the top floor we had the breakfast, or whatever you call it, a wedding feast, and we had Amanda Lahore, a most amazing drag queen, did 9 cabaret acts for us. And we still have to thank Amanda Lahore for her wonderful contribution to that day. But John and I thought, God, it was so good. Should we have a divorce and do it all again?
In some ways, we were quite disappointed. We thought, how do we go from a civil union to a marriage? We thought, well, perhaps we have to get divorced. We thought, oh, good, an excuse for a party. But we couldn't, all we'd do was had to pay $120 an upgrade, you know, hello?
2005, we had our civil union on Labor Day, wasn't it? 1st of May. And then 10 years to the hour it was, we had our wedding.
Trevor Mallard opened the refurbished Rainbow Room, and it was a privilege to be here, and it was a wonderful occasion, and I still find that this gives me a sense of awe, and I hope that all members of Parliament are virtually obliged to come here and study what has gone on in the past, to understand what it means to have been different, what it means to be different, but also a coherent and useful
But that
society.
evening of opening up the Rainbow Room, for me and for John as well, but for me especially, meeting a whole lot of people that I hadn't seen for a long time.